May God add his blessing to the reading, hearing, and proclamation of his word. "I'm in love with you," Aaron said to Jane before adding, "How do you like that? I buried the lead." Aaron and Jane are characters in the movie Broadcast News that came out 30 years ago. Aaron is a reporter, played by Albert Brooks. Jane is a producer, played by Holly Hunter. And indeed, Aaron is in love with Jane, but Jane thinks that she's in love with Tom, Tom being the anchorman in the movie, who's played by William Hurt. Aaron tries to talk Jane into not being in love with Tom. He even says Tom, despite being a nice guy, is the devil. Aaron finally breaks down and tells Jane, "I'm in love with you." And then, being the newsman that he is, since that's what comes at the end of his monologue, a really terrific monologue for an actor, he turns around and says, "Well, how do you like that? I buried the lead." Now here, in this story from Matthew, the Pharisees and the Herodians try to bury the lead too, but Jesus won't let them do that. The Pharisees and the Herodians give Jesus a question that they think that either he can't answer or won't answer, but Jesus gives them an answer that they didn't see coming. You see, the plan was to trap Jesus because of who Jesus was and what Jesus had done. Jesus has entered Jerusalem triumphantly in what we call Palm Sunday. Jesus then, in Matthew's Gospel, goes into the temple and overturns the tables of the money changers. Jesus has made a name for himself. He has certainly made enemies for himself. He is a threat not just to the Pharisees, not just to the officers of the temple. He's also a threat to the Herodians as well. He's a threat to those who are positioned by Rome in Jerusalem as representatives of the Roman government. So since he's a threat to these two groups, they band together and they come together, practically forming a committee trying to test Jesus, trying to trap Jesus. They've wanted to arrest him ever since he told the parable of the talents. So they have always been trying, or at least at this point, they are beginning to try to trap Jesus. And so they set a test for him. Now next week we're going to look at another passage from Matthew in which again the Pharisees tried to test Jesus. And the thing is, the word test in Matthew is only used on two occasions, and that's when the Pharisees are trying to test Jesus and when Satan is trying to test Jesus. So it's a very important test here, and it regards a very real situation. There was heavy taxation from Rome in Jerusalem. It would lead to a bloody revolt if it had not already at this point in time. I think it was 6 AD, so the revolt had already happened. It really was a question of conscience for the Jews. Were they to pay the temple tax or not? Were they to pay tax to Rome using coins which had the Roman emperor's head on them? And to them that was blasphemy. To the Jews that was blasphemy. This was a real crisis of conscience for the Jews. They wondered if they should be using these coins, which they could have banned from the temple. They wondered if they should be using these coins or anything to pay taxes to Herod. And so they asked Jesus this question along with the Herodians. No matter which way Jesus answers, he's going to get in trouble. If he says, yes, it's legal to pay the tax, the Jews will be angry with him. If he says, no, it's not legal to pay the tax, then Rome will be angry with him. It's a very difficult position for Jesus, and they try to butter him up here, saying to him, teacher, which is actually less a term of respect than we think, because if they really would have respected him, they would have called him Lord. Teacher, they say, starting to butter him up, talking about how he always tells the truth. Really, they are telling the truth. He's everything they say that he is in order to flatter him. He's everything that they say, and he is so much better. So they ask him this question that's supposed to be unanswerable. And Jesus gives them an answer that they never saw coming. In a way, what he tells them is that, in all honesty, they've known the answer all along. But still, it's a surprise to them. They don't see this coming because, much to their surprise here, what Jesus does when he answers this question, what Jesus does is that he makes God the subject. He makes God the subject of the discussion of what they're talking about here. And that's really the surprise to the Pharisees and the Herodians, because they didn't think that they were going to be talking about God. They thought they were going to be talking about taxes. They thought they were going to be talking about giving taxes to the emperor. They were going to ask Jesus a question that was going to set him in opposition to either the temple or to Rome and would get him in trouble either way. But Jesus gets out of that trap by giving them the answer that they never see coming, the answer that makes God the subject. You see, here all Jesus does is stick to the facts, and the facts are as plain as day. Yes, the coin may have Caesar's image on it, but we are made in God's image. So if Caesar gets some of us, we are still God's. See, Jesus makes the subject here when he says, give to the emperor what is the emperor, and give to God what is God's. And as he does this, they are amazed, these opponents who come to him. They leave him because they never expected Jesus to make God the subject, when no one wanted God to be the subject. But that's exactly what Jesus did, making God the subject. What a reminder for us in everything to make God the subject. How can we make God the subject in all that we do, whether as a church or as believers? How can we make God the subject of all that we do? It may be unexpected or unanticipated to think about that, but how can we make God the subject of all that we do? It would take conscious effort to do that, but if Jesus makes God the subject here when God wasn't supposed to be the subject, how can we who follow Jesus make God the subject of all we do? It's not impossible. I've seen people do it. I've seen people be loving and even godly when others try to attack them or trap them verbally. But how can we do that? How can we make God the subject of all that we do, as Jesus does here in this trap? How can we make God the subject of all that we do? Can we do this by thinking about what we owe God in light of everything? In this discussion of taxation, Jesus says to give to the emperor the things that are the emperor's, and to give to God the things that are God's. We pay taxes too. We give something to our emperors, but if we give to God the things that are God's, what does that look like? We get statements even from the church to help us pay our taxes, but what helps us give to God the things that are God's? We may pay the emperors a certain portion of our earnings, but what do we think that we owe God, and what do we give to God? Think about the first fruits that the Bible mentions and giving those to God. Think about Cain and Abel's sacrifices. Abel's was acceptable, but not Cain's, because Abel gave to God from the first that he had and the best that he had. Some people think that's why we dress up on Sunday mornings in our Sunday best, to show God that we're offering our best. This almost wasn't the morning to do that, because I was supposed to go over to St. Paul's this afternoon to help with Rise Against Hunger, and they recommended wearing jeans and sneakers to be comfortable for the 2 hours that we would be standing putting together the dehydrated food kits, because my mother is in the hospital. I won't be going over this afternoon, but it is the reason that we dress on Sunday morning. Is it to show God that we are offering God the first fruits, the best of what we have? If so, that's nice, but what else do we offer God? Do we offer God the first of all we have? Do we offer God the best of all we have? Even though we have everything from God, it can be a struggle sometimes to give God our first, to give God our best. But what do we give God? What do we offer God? In light of everything that we owe God, what and how do we give to God? How do we make God the subject in not just our giving, but in all that we do? How can we make everything that we do reflect the lordship of Jesus Christ? Maybe we can do it. Maybe we can do that by asking ourselves what belongs to God. The comedian Robert Klein used to talk about how competitive his ex-wife was. He talked about how when they were still married, she would run marathons and she would read books to help her compete in marathons, books like Eat to Finish First. Robert Klein said he wasn't that competitive. He wasn't that motivated when it came to things like racing or his diet. He said while she was reading Eat to Finish First, he was reading Eat to Come in 52nd or something like that. He was trying to finish in 52nd place while his wife was trying to finish in first. Where do we put God In what place do we put God? Where do we put God when Jesus made God the subject? Where do we put God? And what do we give to God? Amen. Thanks be to God.